Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today I'm going to be talking about something that quite a lot of my clients find tricky, and that is feedback. So, you know how they say, oh, feedback is a gift. And you're like, yeah, doesn't really feel like that to me. If you find feedback difficult or tricky, this episode's for you, because I think there's a gap between how we think we should feel when we receive feedback and how we actually feel. So let's say that right now you take negative feedback really personally, you find it really difficult, you find it tricky, it kind of knocks you or it sends you spiraling, or you feel like maybe you're overly affected by it. Then great, this episode is for you. And I did a bit of Googling to find out what people Google. That's a bit meta. But it turns out a lot of people are Googling how to take feedback, how to stop taking criticism so personally, how to handle bad feedback at work. But I also know that it is fairly common for the clients that I work with. So when people's confidence is low, generally, part of it can be that feedback is really hard. Whether you call it negative feedback or constructive feedback, whatever, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, but just here, anything that you find hard, basically, in terms of feedback. And for my clients, the people who I work with, and maybe for you, feedback, I think, can feel disproportionately painful. Even when we're generally doing well, we generally get good feedback. I'm not talking about situations where maybe you're in a performance review situation or it's something like that. Generally, for my clients, they're doing okay. Generally, they get good feedback, but they might get a piece of feedback or something constructive, and that is what they find really hard. That is what this episode is about today. And this comes up when I do consultations with people. They tell me that it's one of the issues that they struggle with and that they want to work on. So we're going to look at why that kind of feedback can feel so intense and what you can actually do about it. But first, I wanted to share a bit of my story with this, my personal story with this, because I used to find feedback very painful. It's almost sort of hard to remember now because I don't think I find it very painful anymore. In fact, I don't. Let's say that I don't love someone telling me something which is tough to hear. It's probably not my favorite experience, but I no longer find it debilitatingly painful and struggle to hear it. And I've reflected on why I used to feel like that and now I don't. And the thing that I come up with is that I used to be very, very, very self-critical. And so I think that made me extremely sensitive, because the truth for me was that there wasn't a lot of other people in my life that were highly critical, really harsh with me. That would make anybody sensitive. But for me, it generally was coming from the inside. That inside harsh criticism all the time, it did make me really sensitive. So that when someone else would say something that was feedback, and all of my situations were generally constructive, supportive, and fair, I was very lucky. And people would give me feedback in that context. And even then, I would really struggle with it. Like I would squirm. I would find it really difficult. I would have to kind of try and swallow the emotions that were coming up for me. And, I managed to take it, right? I kind of played the role, etc. But I find it really, really difficult. And I would think about it for ages afterwards because I was already so sore from all the self-criticism that I think it was like, so when someone gave me a punch, this feedback, they were actually giving me something constructive. It wasn't like they were just punching me in the face, but it felt like it landed on a bruise rather than landing on, neutral ground. So I was already really sensitive. It wasn't just the feedback. It was the fact that I had already been tearing myself apart internally. And for me, that was the context in which I received this feedback. So it was super hard. Now, This is going to be a little bit different for everybody. So, that is my personal story with it. You might find something you recognize in there. But we're going to talk a little bit about why I think this happens, this sensitivity to feedback and this really struggling to take it in maybe in the spirit it's intended and use it. But I want you to listen out and be discerning because the reasons are many, I think. Having coached people on this for years, I've seen the same kinds of issues coming up, and I'm going to talk you through those. But it's not a nice, neat, this is the reason why it's happening for everybody. We're all humans. We've had a different upbringing. We've got a different experiences. We've got different contexts. And so this is not a nice, neat issue. And I want to say from the outset that I don't think this issue can be nicely solved with a few hacks or a few tricks. And I don't really think any of the issues that I deal with can be solved like that. But I know there's often a desire. Can you tell me this, how I can deal with this so that it feels fine? And the answer to that is usually not really no. Because if this is actually enough of a problem for you that you're going to listen to a podcast, it's probably going to be a little bit more nuanced than that. But let's see where we get to. So, in my experience, having difficulty with feedback doesn't usually happen in isolation. It's part of a broader emotional, a broader psychological picture. And very often it comes with the people I work with as part and parcel of a low confidence cycle. Now, if you don't know what that means, go to the link in the show notes, take the confidence assessment, and it'll tell you whether or not you're in a low confidence cycle. But that low confidence cycle is a set of patterns, a set of habits that create a particular kind of internal environment. So when I said that I used to be really harsh and really self-critical, that could put someone into a low confidence cycle. That was the situation for me. But it might be something a little different for you. People struggle for different reasons. So I think it's almost unhelpful to ask, why am I bad at receiving feedback? I think it's more helpful, or it's a better question to ask, what's actually going on here for me? When I hear feedback, what's actually going on here? And I'm going to share some things with you today that I hope will help you lift the lid on what's actually going on here for you. Because I think you need to be cognizant of that if you're going to work on, and perhaps this is something you would like to work on, getting better at hearing, using, and receiving constructive feedback in 2026. What if you could, if you're listening to this in real time, it's January 2026. What if by December 2026, you could have gotten a whole lot better at? What if it's a skill that you could develop? And I think that it probably is. But first, I want to draw a crucial distinction because I think there are two, and I've already alluded to this, but there are two different scenarios under which you could be given feedback. And the first is when feedback is kind of unfair or unsafe, or given in that kind of environment. And the second is when feedback is fair and it's still hard. And I want you to think about and see if you can discern which one is which for you. So when feedback is actually unfair or unsafe, unlikely you're going to feel that great about it. Maybe the problem isn't how you're receiving it. The problem is that the feedback is just unfair, or you're constantly being provided with feedback in a psychologically unsafe environment. The feedback might be biased, it might be targeted, it might be delivered in a really hostile way. You might be in an environment which is really harsh, really critical, really unfair, has really high standards, and, hangs people out to dry. Well, in that kind of environment, I'm not going to say that you couldn't receive feedback more neutrally, but I think it's going to be hard. Because when you're in that kind of environment, your number one priority, or should I say your brain's number one priority, is safety. And anything that looks like a threat to that safety is not going to be received particularly well. And if you're in that kind of environment, really harsh, really difficult, hangs everyone out to dry, and you're getting negative feedback, of course your system's going to register that as alert, unsafe. This is very bad. And you're going to feel anxious, worried, annoyed, whatever, for good reason. If you're in that kind of environment and feedback is actually a threat to your safety, your job, etc., then are you ever going to like it? Are you ever going to receive it as a gift? Possibly not. I don't think it means that all is lost. You may be able to get to an internal safety point where you can receive it better than you did, but it's possibly going to be tricky. Also, there is often a power dynamic with feedback, right? Where it's a boss or a gatekeeper somehow, or it's somebody that you can't easily challenge, and they're the one giving you the feedback. And that also adds in an extra layer, an extra dynamic. So the truth is, if you're in this situation, feedback might hurt. That doesn't mean that anything's gone wrong. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Actually, the problem may not be your sensitivity at all. It may be the environment which is the issue. And I really want you to be discerning if you can on this one. But what about the other scenario where feedback is fair and it's still hard? So let's say the person giving it is generally supportive, the feedback is reasonable, and yet it still lands very painfully. This is where most of my clients are getting really stuck because it's at that point that they're kind of thinking, well, it's not unfair. Like, I get it. And in a way, they know they need feedback in order to improve. And that's actually just part of, being an adult at work and having a job. We get feedback. That's part of it. But they still find it really painful. And at that point, it's confusing, it's worrying, and people are saying, why can't I handle this when I should be able to? And I used to do this too, adding like a layer of judgment on top of what is already a difficult situation. I used to give myself a hard time about it. I used to think it was some kind of personal flaw or failing that I seemed to take it a lot. I seemed to be a lot more sensitive to it than other people. Not that I had this discussion with people. I didn't. I kept this all squirreled away inside my own brain. And actually, it took a therapist to say to me, "Well, what if that's actually just not? What if that's just fine? What if that's just how you are, who you are? You are sensitive in some ways." I was like, "Oh, I'd never even considered that I could not make a judgment about that and just be like, yeah, I just find this thing a lot more difficult than some people do." End of conversation. So I think there's quite a lot of power in just being able to drop that judgment. So what if you could just say, yeah, I find feedback really hard to take. I feel very sensitive when someone gives me feedback. It's a bit of a nightmare for me. No judgment. I think there could be quite a lot of power in even just taking that little step. I'm going to walk you through 4 steps, which I hope will help you think about what you can do if you find feedback really hard or really painful. And the first question I think is to ask, is this feedback unfair or am I unsafe? And if your answer to that is yes, I'd focus on getting support, understanding that if the context is that it's unfair or you're unsafe, that it's really probably going to hurt and it's going to raise your hackles. And yeah, big surprise. But if you ask that question, is this feedback unfair or unsafe? And your answer is no, I do actually think it's broadly fair, then go on to the next steps. So I want you to leave it at this step if the feedback is unfair or unsafe. Focus on getting some support, focus on chatting to people about it, understanding your context, and maybe just trying to be a bit understanding about the fact that if you are getting feedback that's unfair and unsafe, then no wonder you feel sensitive about it. Stands to reason, doesn't it? Seems totally logical. But if the answer is no, and you think, no, this feedback is broadly fair, but I still find it super hard, then I want you to move to step 2, which is just try to notice your pattern, but without judging it. So most people, and when I think about myself, I definitely had a default reaction. And I think most people have a default reaction. Most people can describe it to me when I ask them. So notice your default reaction. And again, no judgment. Let's just try and notice what was happening. So if you tune into the last piece of feedback that you got that felt really hard, try and take yourself back into that moment for a second and just notice what happened. Like if we could slow it down, what went on in your brain and in your body? Could be a lot of different things. Maybe for you, it was a feeling of rising panic Or maybe you felt completely like you shut down and you couldn't hear. Maybe you felt like you were being attacked and so you got defensive. Maybe you started to argue internally or externally. Maybe you started to ruminate in your head and do self-criticism. My pattern was like internally kind of get this like wobbliness. That's the best way I can describe it. But externally, I would put all my focus and attention on looking like I was fine externally. So I think I would go very still if I'm thinking about it. And I would be really trying to keep my face straight and possibly actually not doing that much of a great job. If I'm looking at myself now, I think maybe my face actually showed what I was thinking or feeling. But anyway, I would put all my attention into looking like it was fine, looking like I was very controlled and very receptive to this feedback, even though inside I would be feeling very wobbly. So, you probably, if you can tune into one of those moments, already know what that default reaction is. And the goal is just that in step two is just to notice it. What is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do you know when it started happening? What's your default reaction after the meeting? Do you just put it out of your head and think, oh, well, fuck it. He's an idiot anyway. Or do you just think, oh my God, this is awful. What does this mean? And then kind of ruminate like what happens in the moment and then afterwards. And then when you've done that, step two, I want you to move on to step three, which goes a little bit deeper and asks, all right, what's actually going on here for me? What's actually going on? And this is where we try and dig a little bit deeper underneath that reaction to try and explain it. And you might just ask yourself the question, what would make sense of this reaction that I'm having? When I asked that question, the first thing that came to mind with my example was, well, I'm being got at all the time. And so it's just really hard for me to be got at, quote unquote, by my manager. And the person that was, getting at me all the time actually was me. So for me, that was what was actually going on. I felt like I was being got at all the time, which I actually was because I was getting at myself all the time. And so when someone else was also getting at me, that was like, this is just a bridge too far. Everyone's always getting at me. When in reality, in my situation, they actually weren't. They were generally supportive, helpful, and, pretty reasonable. Now, I can see that now from the outside, but that's how it felt in the moment on the inside. So that was what was actually going on for me. But let's go over to you. What's actually going on here for you? And I'm going to share some things that I've seen and that I've chatted to other people about in case this helps you to think or notice anything that might be relevant to you. And this is a good question to ask, or I might ask. So when they give you this feedback, it means ... And I find if I ask that question, they will fill in the answer with whatever they think it actually means. And somebody might say, it means that I am bad at my job. It means that they think I'm a terrible person. It means they think I'm a failure. It means they think I'm crap at this. It means they think, etc., etc. So if you ask a good question, the real answers to what's going on for me here will tend to just pop out. Helpful, very helpful to actually see what's going on. Another question that you can ask is, when this person gives me the feedback, they're actually thinking that, what is it you're assuming that they're actually thinking? And again, if you ask yourself that question, when they give me the feedback, they are actually thinking that I'm incompetent, that I'm not good enough, that I'm never going to be able to do this, right? Let's see what that question reveals. And once you know what that question reveals, you can see why you feel so terrible when somebody gives you feedback. So let's use that example. Let's say that I'm thinking that this feedback about this particular piece of work actually means the other person's thinking I'm incompetent, that I can't do my job, and that I'm never going to be able to do it. Now, if I'm really believing that, that that's what this feedback means and that's what they're actually trying to say to me, then of course I'm going to feel terrible. When I've put effort and time and energy into the work that I do, and then somebody's thinking that I'm incompetent, I'm rubbish, and I'm never going to be able to get it. I mean, terrible. Or use the first example. When they give me this feedback, it means that I'm bad at my job, that I'm a terrible person, that I'm a failure. I defy anybody not to feel sensitive and find that difficult. If that's actually what you're thinking and believing, or something like that, of course you're going to feel terrible. Of course you're going to feel really sensitive. Of course you're going to find that really hard. I think anybody who is actually thinking that's the feedback is going to find it really hard. This is a really key step, so don't miss out on this. If you actually want to get better at taking feedback in 2026, then this is a crucial part of the process. Understand what's actually going on by asking yourself these questions. When they give me this feedback, it means, or they're actually thinking that, and see what it reveals. You might have to write it down, or you might just see the thoughts pop easily out of your head. You may even speak it aloud. But when you can see what you're actually thinking and believing, you can understand why you might feel sensitive. So good to get some understanding. And if I use my own example there, if I insert my own example, I can really understand why somebody who feels like they're being got at all the time is going to feel really sensitive and find it difficult to be given some constructive feedback. Because it feels like they're being got at all over again. So of course they're going to be sensitive. And of course they're going to have to sit there feeling really wobbly inside while they pretend that it looks fine on the outside. Because that's like the best that they've got in the moment, isn't it? And when I see myself doing that, I can see in my mind's eye with my nice blue dress on in the meeting room, I feel a lot of compassion to that version of me who I can see how she's trying to keep her face straight, even though she feels like she's being got at. And probably if it was somebody else, you'd be quite understanding. So if it feels okay for you to do that, take what you now know. You think it means that you're bad at your job, you're a terrible person, you're a failure, or you are incompetent, or it means you're never going to get it, etc. Whatever little thought or belief popped out, and then try just looking at that meeting, if you can, in your mind's eye, and looking at that person, you, who's desperately trying to pretend that everything's fine, if that's what you were doing, or whatever reaction you were having, whilst they were believing that that's what this feedback actually meant. Because that is not easy. That is tough. And a little bit of understanding around this, I think, can go a really long way. So once you've done that, and only then, I think you can move to step 4, which is to decide, make a positive decision about what you would like to have happen around feedback. So, what would you like to work towards? Let's say we're thinking about 2026, and let's say by December 2026, how would you like to be able to receive that feedback? What would handling it well or in the way you want actually look like? And not just look like on the outside. We're not just going to get better at pretending that we're okay with it. The key is to actually feel different so that we don't have to pretend. The truth here, I think, is that there potentially on this issue is no quick fix, but there is hope. So to be able to use feedback well, you have to feel safe enough to hear it. And that might require working in a completely different place. Or if you think, no, my environment is generally safe enough. And, generally the person who's giving me it is supportive. They've got my best interest at heart, whatever. If you actually think that, then there is a lot that you can do. I've given you my example that my taking feedback has changed a lot for me. So it could change a lot for you too. And I've worked with clients for whom it has really changed and they don't take it so personally anymore. That's the thing that people tend to tell me. Oh, well, it's not personal. And when it feels like it's not personal, you're like, oh, well, okay, could make these amendments. When it's not about you and it's actually about the work, or it's not about you and it's about the task, then it's a lot easier to hear. And I also think sometimes you just have to give yourself a bit of grace around the fact that it stings to hear stuff, doesn't it? It can really sting. Even if you think it's true, it can really sting. And here's one practical tip. And again, please be discerning about using this tip, because if you're in an environment which is really not good and that's the context, I don't think this tip is probably very useful. But if you're in a safe environment and it's reasonable and someone gives you some feedback, you can try asking, is there any way in which this could be true? Like, is there anywhere inside, if I look, that I could find this? And this is my example. It's a bit of a random example, but I'm going to share it. So let's say someone says to me, I got this from Byron Katie, who is she a coach? I don't know what she would call herself, but I got this from her anyway. And I've always found it really useful. So she always said, if somebody says to her, Katie, you're a selfish bitch, she says that she looks inside and she thinks, okay, where could that be true? And she said, I can always find it. And she's a very lovely woman. And so she says to them, yeah, I can see how that could be true. And not like she's got any judgment about it. She can just see that it might be true. And sometimes I use that. So if somebody gives me the feedback, oh, Anna, you're just a real pain in the arse. I look inside and I think, yeah, I am actually. Sometimes I'm a real pain in the arse. I can just be like, yeah, I can own that. I am a pain in the arse sometimes. Or if someone said to me, Anna, this is like a sloppy job, I'd be like, yeah, sometimes I do a sloppy job. I can see where that might be true. And I'm going to clarify, this does not mean taking abuse from people. It does not mean agreeing with everything. But what I think that this, and this is the only like little tip like this I'm going to give you, is it kind of removes the threat if you're like, yeah, I can see how that could be true. So I leave you with that in case it's helpful. And I want to end with this, that feeling confident handling feedback doesn't mean that it's never going to hurt, I don't think. Unless you're like an enlightened being, which, let's face it, probably none of us are, with zero ego, they just may be able to accept feedback with complete calm, neutrality, right? But probably none of us are aiming for that. But maybe we're aiming for being confident enough to handle negative feedback means that sometimes it might hurt, and that's okay. We're okay. They're okay. It's okay. And maybe accepting feedback is a skill and it is part of being in a high confidence cycle. And you're allowed to be learning. You're allowed to learn. Maybe 2026, that's one of the things you're going to have on your development plan. I'm going to develop my skill when it comes to listening to and using constructive feedback. I hope that was helpful. If you would like to come and do this work with me, there is a link in the show notes where you can book a call to explore private coaching. You're very welcome to book a time, come and speak to me, tell me about what you're struggling with confidence-wise at work. I will tell you whether or not I think I can help, because I reckon you deserve to feel confident if you are competent, and you deserve to get to a place where you can hear feedback and you can be like, okay, fine, I think I can use it. Or you can say, oh, they're just a pain in the arse and I'm moving on. All right. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be